Things you never hear in church. I can't wait for the preacher to preach on money. Right around the corner, as I said in the beginning, are our Stewardship Commitment Sundays, November the 2nd and November the 9th. You will be invited to bring your financial commitment here to this altar and consecrate it on one of those 2 Sundays before God. As we prepare for those Sundays, I want to share some thoughts with you, thoughts that are important to you and thoughts that are important to Pat and Richard Smith. 5 things. First of all, what we do with our money matters to God. What you and I do with our money matters to God. Did you know that there are 500 verses in the Bible on faith, but there are 2,350 verses on money and on material possessions? Let that sink in. If you peruse the Bible as a whole, there are 500 verses on faith, one of the most significant spiritual truths of our lives, and yet there are 2,350 verses on money and material possessions. And if you go to the teachings of Jesus, if you look in the Gospels of the New Testament, you will find that Jesus talked more about money, more about material possessions than he did about faith, than he did about salvation, than he did about prayer, than he did about love. Jesus talked more about money and material possessions than he did about faith, than he did about prayer, than he did about salvation, than about anything about which he talked. Why is the Bible so full of verses having to do with money and material possessions? It's really rather simple. What we do with our money is a barometer of our spiritual maturity. What you do with your money, what Richard and Pat Smith do with our money, is a barometer, one way or the other, of our spiritual maturity. There are a lot of things you do and a lot of things I do that tell God a lot about us. There are things we do and things we don't do that tell God a lot about us. But what we do with our money tells God a whole lot about us. And that's the first thing I want us to remember as we prepare for November the 2nd. How you and I use our money tells God something about us. The second insight is faithful stewardship begins with gratitude. Faithful stewardship begins with gratitude. I just love this scene in 1 Chronicles, the 29th chapter, when David calls forth an offering for the building of the temple, which, as I said earlier, he calls a holy house of the Lord. And it says that David came first and gave sacrificially. And then the commanders under him came next and gave sacrificially. And then the supervisors who were under the commanders came and gave sacrificially. And then the workmen who were under the supervisors came and gave sacrificially. And then the lowliest of the low in the kingdom of Israel came and gave sacrificially for the building of the temple. And Chronicles sums it up by the people saying, in wondrous response, "Thanks be to God that everyone gave so willingly and so wholeheartedly." I just love that phrase. To give to God willingly and wholeheartedly. I shared a couple of years ago one of my favorite anecdotal stories about gratitude. There's a 9-year-old boy, and again I shared this a couple of years ago. There's a 9-year-old boy who one morning presented his mother with an invoice for his services. So this 9-year-old boy at the breakfast table presented his mother this invoice. Mowing the lawn, $5. Babysitting little sister, $2.75. Room cleaning, $3.55. Helping grocery store, $2.60. Total due, $13.90. So this 9-year-old boy came to breakfast that morning and handed his mom this invoice totaling $13.90. Well, being the wise mother and woman that she was, she just took the invoice from the little boy and smiled and nodded at it and didn't say anything. Next morning when the boy came to the breakfast table, he found by his plate this invoice. Room and board for 9 years, $86,130. Clothes for 9 years, $38,470. Entertainment for 9 years, $21,254. Laundry for 9 years, $11,972. Total due, $157,826. A little boy looked at the invoice, looked up at his mom, smiled. Let's just call it even, Mom. It is never even, is it? What God has done for you in your life and what God has done for me in my life is beyond measure. You don't need to calculate it even. The fact is that each and every one of us in this sanctuary knows we are bountifully blessed, aren't we? That every single day of our lives there are good things that come to us from God, most of which we don't deserve. And so when it comes to me thinking about our giving to Christ's work in the world through this church, and you thinking about your giving, start with gratitude. Start with how grateful you need to be and how grateful Richard and Pat Smith need to be. Again, I cannot measure, nor can you measure, the bounty of the gifts of God in your life and in mine. And so every one of us ought with enthusiasm, like the people of Israel, to give willingly and to give wholeheartedly. The third insight is generosity is the watchword. Generosity is the watchword. This is an intriguing scene in the Gospel of Mark, where Jesus sits himself down across from the temple treasury, across from what Eugene Peterson calls the temple offering box. And he is publicly watching what people put into the temple offering box. And he watches as the wealthy folks come by and put in their offering. And then he watches, as the text tells us, as you know, as a poor widow comes and puts in 2 cents. In that day and time, the offering box was such that if a person dropped in a coin like she dropped in, the measly coin she dropped in, everyone could hear the sound. You could hear the sound of the large notable coins made of gold or bronze or silver. And you could hear the sound of the coins that weren't so notable when they hit the offering plate. And so everybody knew that this poor widow had dropped in 2 measly cents. And Jesus watches it, and again, you know the story, and he takes the disciples aside and he says, don't be fooled. They gave what they could afford. She gave sacrificially what she really couldn't afford. They gave what they won't miss, Eugene Peterson says in his translation. She gave what she will sorely miss as a poor widow. I want to tell you something very practical. It's not about the dollars you give or the dollars we give. It's the proportion of our resources that we give. I have known many a person on fixed income whose giving to the life of the church was far more sacrificial than even Richard and Pat Smith. I have known many a person whose giving to the congregation, to the work of Christ through the church was truly sacrificial because proportionate to that person's wealth or proportionate to that person's material possessions or proportionate to that person's resources truly were sacrificing. John Wesley really had a wonderful formula for this. Remember, he wrote in the 18th century. He said, earn all you can, save all you can, and give all you can. It's not a bad formula. Earn all you can, save all you can, and give all you can. To be generous, earn all you can, save all you can, and give all you can. In other words, he's saying it's okay for you to earn everything you can. I've said before, God never indicts wealth. There's nothing wrong with any of you or any of us making all we can. And there's nothing wrong with saving all you can for your family, for your present and future well-being. Not a thing wrong in the world with you being wise enough to save all you can for your present and future well-being. But if in earning all you can and saving all you can, you and I do not give all we can, there's a spiritual problem. And Wesley's formula depended on a balance of those three, that when I earn all I can and I save all I can for the well-being of my family, I'm willing generously then to give all I can. So there's nothing wrong, again, with you earning everything you can. Nothing wrong at all. There's nothing wrong with you taking care of your family, saving wisely for the present and the future. But if in the midst of that, you and I do not give all we can, then we have not been generous to God. The fourth insight is this: your offering helps this church touch lives. Your giving, your faithful giving to this church, our faithful giving to this church helps this church touch lives. Did you know there are 33,000 congregations in the United Methodist Church in this nation, just in the United States of America? 33 United Methodist congregations in this country. We are in the top 1% of the 33,000 congregations of the United Methodist Church when it comes to membership size, worship attendance, and budget size. Let that sink in. Of the 33,000 congregations in the United States of America, which are United Methodist, Germantown United Methodist Church is in the top 1% by size, worship attendance, and budget of all those congregations. And so in the United Methodist Church, we are called, quote, a vital, vibrant congregation, end quote. Simply because of our size, our worship attendance, and our budget. But I don't believe being a vital, vibrant congregation has anything to do with size. I don't think being in the top 1% of the United Methodist Church means anything if God is not able to touch lives through the ministries and programs and mission of this congregation. In the end, it's not about our size, it's not about our worship attendance, it's not about our budget, it's about the extent to which we let God use us to share His love with others, to bring people more fully to Jesus, and to make this world a better place in which to live. It doesn't matter that we're in the top 1% if we're not a proper vessel through whom God touches people's lives. And so I made a list of the things that I celebrate in the life of this church. Manifold lives are touched by the Spirit of God through our worship services. I believe that. People seeking loving hospitality and kind people find it here. You are a most hospitable people. I say all the time that I don't believe anyone could come into the fellowship of this church and not receive a warm welcome. High levels of people grow deeper in Christ through our Bible studies, our Sunday school, our small group offerings. Growing numbers of children and youth find here the truth of God's love and the opportunity to know Jesus more fully. Persons of all ages discover food for the mind, the heart, the spirit. Many people outside this congregation who have special needs, whether physical, emotional, or spiritual, find those needs met through the resources or the volunteerism of this church. The educational needs of children in Shelby County are directly met by this church. Homeless needs are directly met by the needs of this church, especially as we launch our Room in the End this fall. The spiritual needs of people who are hurting out in our community and beyond within this congregation are met by the programs and ministries of this church. I really believe that what makes us vital and vibrant is not our size, but our heart, our conviction, our belief that we want to be people through whom God makes a difference in the lives of others. What you do and what we do in offering enables that to happen. And the final insight this morning is our United Methodist connection matters. I don't need to tell you about what's going on in West Africa. You don't need me to tell you the depth of the hurt in Liberia and West Africa. I read just recently in our United Methodist Reporter a sobering, painful story. It's about a little boy named Frank. Frank is 12 years old. He lives in Liberia. Frank's father was killed in the Civil War of 1999 to 2003. And so he is left with just his mother. And Frank's mother recently died of Ebola. Here are some comments from little Frank, 12 years old. I went to my relatives after my mother died, but they chased me away even after I told them that I didn't have Ebola. A day can pass without eating anything, he said, 12 years old. A few people will listen to you and give you food to eat, but the majority will chase you away. I don't know when I'll go back to school. Right now, I'm just looking for food and a place to live. There are 4,000 orphaned children presently in West Africa because of the Ebola crisis. We hear about the adults who are dying and or who are ill, growing by the thousands daily. Not many of us have necessarily heard the story that there are 4,000 orphaned children whose parents have either died in the Civil War or because of Ebola, and they're being neglected by their families who, out of fear, will not receive them into their homes. And they're wandering the streets of West Africa, begging for food, trying to sustain themselves day by day by day. I can't go to Liberia. I can't go to West Africa. The chances are that no one in this sanctuary can go to Liberia, West Africa. I doubt any of us are called necessarily to go to Liberia or West Africa. But the United Methodist Church is in Liberia, and the United Methodist Church is in West Africa, and the United Methodist Church is providing clinics for the victims of Ebola disease. And it's sending supplies through Doctors Without Borders that there might be help for those who are hurting in that country. And our denomination is expanding its aid into West Africa and into Liberia. Richard Smith cannot go to Liberia, but Richard Smith can give to the well-being of Germantown United Methodist Church and to our connection to the United Methodist Church, and some of the dollars, 14% of the dollar that I give to this church, every dollar that I give this church, 14% of every dollar you give to this church goes for the work of the United Methodist Church across this globe. Doing things you and I can't do, going places we cannot go. I want you to know that. Out of our $3.2 million budget, $432,000 of that budget, just that portion, is designated for the wondrous work of the United Methodist Church in the world. So we're 2 Sundays away from our first commitment Sunday. And you'll make that commitment hopefully either on that Sunday or the following Sunday, the 9th. And as you prayerfully consider what you're going to do, I hope you'll remember these 5 things. What you and I do with our money matters to God. It tells God a lot about us. Our financial stewardship should start with our gratitude, our profound gratitude for what God has done and is doing in our lives. And generosity is the watchword. Earn all you can, save all you can, but may we all give all we can. And your faithful giving through this church enables us to share the love of God, to present this Jesus, and to make this world a better place by our programs and our ministries. And your giving helps us join heart and hands with a global United Methodist Church that's going places you and I will never, ever have the chance to go. Making a difference in spots that you and I only read about. I invite you to remember these things with me as we prepare to make our commitments in the coming weeks. Thanks be to God. Amen.